Chapter 14. Billie stroked Dylan's hair and watched him sleep. His legs were warm and smooth against her own. She wasn't scared to go to sleep. Her fear of the dream lessened with a partner in her bed. Interesting that sex instilled such a sense of peace. She felt relaxed and calm, but just too introspective to doze off. He murmured in his sleep and rolled away from her. Dylan Brewster. He had shown up at her door a few hours before and asked if she wanted company. She felt a tiny, delicious shiver run down her spine as she looked at him now. The way he had asked politely to stay the night. Quite the gentleman. At first, anyway. The sex had been passionate and wild. Billie remembered having read somewhere that sex was a normal reaction in threatening circumstances, a life-affirming instinct. That was probably so. She liked the young soldier a lot, and was glad to have him there. But she was not in love with him. She thought of Mitch, and was surprised that it didn't hurt so much anymore. Whatever regret she'd had over their short time together, it wasn't connected to having made love with Dylan. Mitch had only wanted her to feel loved and whole, whether or not he could be there. She doubted that he would begrudge her some peace of mind now. In the morning, the crew would meet to discuss final plans for carrying out their mission. They would be dropping onto the planet in a little less than 12 hours. Her stomach tightened at the thought. If everything went perfectly, they could be on their way back to Earth soon afterward. She was nervous, but excited too. It felt good to be on the offensive for a change, to fight actively instead of always running away. And maybe to make a difference for the people left on Earth. Billie moved down beneath the cover, snuggling against her new lover for warmth. He turned towards her and opened his eyes halfway. "Hey," he said, voice heavy with sleep. "You okay?" "Yeah, just thinking." He yawned and closed his eyes, but smiled slightly. "What about?" he said, and slid one hand between her legs. She parted them and leaned back. "I thought you were out for the night," she said, and inhaled sharply as he slipped a finger into her. "I am. Just ignore me," he said. Billie laughed and touched his erection, moved her hand up and down the silky textured skin. He moaned as she crawled over him, covering his body with hers. She felt him slide deep inside, thrust herself against him to find her own pleasure, felt her climax build and stretch towards release. This is life, she thought, and cried out. Ripley stood in the loading dock and looked at the people assembled in front of her, watched them absorb the information that Tully and Wilks laid out. They were in orbit around what sounded like hell. The Kurtz would land and drop off the APC, in which some of them would go check things out, then report back. Everyone agreed that it was the best action before coming up with the final plan, to be certain of what they were up against. Must be getting mellow with age, she thought. There was a time when waiting to do anything would have been out of the question. Moto had suggested sending a robot probe first, but the motion had been vetoed. Not a bad idea, but what probes they had were severely limited. It wouldn't pay to get the wrong idea, and if the bot you sent couldn't see very well or smell the alien stink, that might give you a full sense of security. Ripley had to smile at that. Security, right. Wilks and Tully wrapped up their presentation and turned to look at Ripley. She knew what was expected of her. "Well," she said, "anyone dream of the Queen last night?" The crew members looked at each other and then shook their heads. Apparently nobody had. "Does that mean she knows we're here?" said Adcox. "Maybe so. Or it could just mean that she overshot us. Hard to say. Adcox nodded, as did several of the others. You know about this place, Ripley said. I wouldn't ask anyone to do anything I'm not prepared to do myself. So I'll be on that APC. And I'm asking for volunteers. Most of you have been in combat situations, but some of you are physically stronger and have a better chance out there. You need to make the decision, not me. However, some of you will have to stay on board the ship. Tully, you're our computer whiz. You stay here. I figured as much, Tully said. She tried to sound disappointed, but Ripley could see her relax a little. Ripley continued. McQuaid and Brewster, as pilots, I don't see how we can risk losing either of you, since I'll be down there. Brewster cut in. Hey, I'm ready for this. McQuaid can fly the ship. Look. I'm not saying you're not capable, Brewster. We need you here. Besides, there has to be somebody to pick up the pieces if we fuck up. Got it? Yeah, he said, in a tone of voice that said he didn't get it at all. Tough shit, thought Ripley. Jones, you stay here too. The doctor shrugged. You might need me there, he said. That's true, but if we get hurt, we can use the aid kits. Better you're here where you can do with major repairs in relative safety when we get back. If we get back, Ripley said to herself. Falk stood up. I'm going, he said. Ripley had assumed that he would volunteer. She nodded at him. Okay, Falk. Welcome aboard. Dunstan and Carvey stood at the same time. Adcox rose, as did Billie. Wilks stepped away from Tully and joined the others, followed by Anna Moto. Ripley held up a hand. Stop there, she said. Like I said, we need a backup crew in case anything happens to us. And if we all go, there's no room for weapons. Moto, you stay. You're probably the best strategist. Billie, I'm going, she said, voice calm. The determination in the young woman's eyes was firm. Ripley hesitated, then nodded. All right, she said. She turned to McQuaid and gave him the go-ahead. He walked to the front of the group and started to explain how the loader suits worked. Ripley looked at her crew. Good people, all of them. This could work. It just might work. It had to work. Wilks stood in the control room with McQuaid, Brewster, and Tully, and watched them look at the readings on the landing sites. They were 20 minutes from drop, and he could feel adrenaline seep into his system when he looked through the shield. Once more, he was going to face off with the monsters. As long as there were any of them left, or he could still breathe, that was going to keep happening. But it didn't seem to get any easier. You'd think he'd be used to it by now. Brewster picked up a cluster of erratic movement in the southern hemisphere, which coincided with Tully's reading of warmest temperature. They would head there first. No one was betting whether or not she would be there. Everyone seemed to know. The meeting had continued for a while after the APC team selection had been made. McQuaid demonstrated the makeshift suits, and Ripley gave a rundown on the scientist, Arona. Wilks had known about Arona and his bombs, as had Anna Moto. Funny, Ripley had seemed relieved that they knew. It looked like a rough ride going down, and it would be pretty stupid if one of them got whacked by a coffee cup that someone forgot to put away, so they policed the ship and dogged down everything loose. Wilks had seen how Billie and Brewster had looked at each other during the meeting, and again during load. He couldn't ignore those glances, and he had a pretty good idea what they meant. Well, it wasn't his business. Then again, He couldn't ignore how it made him feel. That Billie and the corporal had made love. The thought of it made him grit his teeth. It was uncomfortable, although he couldn't pin down why exactly. Billie was a big girl. He didn't need to watch out for her. That he thought about it now, a few minutes before they were to embark on the Queen's home, was stupid. As if he didn't have enough to worry about. He shook his head a little and concentrated on the computer landscape in front of him. They were about to fly into a big fucking mess, and he needed to be all the way there for it. Not concerned about Billie's sex life. With effort, he pushed everything else out of his mind and took a deep breath. It was time to get down to business here, time to do what had to be done. Everything else was secondary. It was going to be kick ass or get it kicked, and either way, he was ready. Semper Fi, motherfuckers, and the devil take the last guy out of the trenches.